I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor, the podcast. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this fine day?
Doing good.
Glad to hear it.
I don't know if the rest of the country's doing as good as we are, but we're doing okay.
Yeah, I don't think the rest of the country is doing as good as we are right now, all things considered.
I know one thing for sure. There's a lot of folks around this country that should be embarrassed at themselves that they call themselves district attorneys.
100%. We have a political hit job going on right now with Trump getting indicted and the district attorney there in Manhattan going after him for a few different reasons. One being the federal government refused to go after these charges against Trump on a federal level, and I truly believe if there was a there, they would have gone after him. They went after him in the House of Representatives multiple times. They held him in contempt of Congress, but they went after him already. And in fact, they went after him at least 2 times. And they went after him for even falsehoods that they had to have known were falsehoods if they investigated it the way they claimed to have investigated it, which was Trump-Russia collusion. They never went after Hillary Clinton for election interference in 2016 with the Trump-Russia collusion. So why do you think that you can go after a political candidate, go after Trump, with Biden as the sitting president, coming out and even saying that we will make sure that he doesn't run/get elected? And this is, I believe, a political hit job. Even though the feds couldn't find enough, he, being Biden and his cronies, found someone who would go after him anyway.
That's because, according to the Biden administration and their little thought process lackeys, there's no longer a First Amendment.
You don't have any First Amendment rights. We can just kind of twist things around and say that it doesn't fall under the First Amendment and then insert reason because. We just saw this with the conviction of a memester who was actually charged and found guilty of election interference for 2016. He created memes that had untruthful information on them and then has now been convicted. And he was indicted within a few weeks after Biden was inaugurated and not a minute before. That was 2021 when he was sworn in. And yet this is said to have happened in 2016. So that was political, and you don't have a First Amendment right. However, magically, Hillary Clinton and the DNC can make up a whole entire narrative about Trump attempting to sway the election, saying, look, he's colluding with Russia, don't vote for him. And they never went after Clinton.
Correct. And all she and the DNC did was pay a fine of a little under $200,000 for their misgivings. And then we had a former presidential candidate that had an affair with a woman, and he pulled up monies.
He used election dollars,
yes,
right?
He pulled up monies from election donors, multiples, so he could pay her $1 million hush money. And he was not taken to court. They decided not to prosecute because that case fell apart.
And what's funny, even Dinesh D'Souza, this was recently brought to my attention. Dinesh D'Souza was prosecuted under Obama for donating too much money to political candidates. He was prosecuted. Now, others have come out, and there's just 200 pages of people who donated too much money to a political candidate. And instead of going after and prosecuting them, they're just having the political candidates return the overages of funds. So why is it that you would prosecute right-leaning individuals for doing something, but left-leaning individuals you treat it as a non-crime, or in some cases you pay a little fine, which is incomparable to what you actually did?
Well, that means we're heading towards socialism or communism, where one faction controls a narrative and they have the power. They set the rules. Since 1791, thanks to Mr. James Madison, we've had a First Amendment, which allowed us to do a lot of these things that we're doing. And I'm not comparing the First Amendment to paying off someone for whether it was services rendered or she was extorting, whatever the case may be. It's actually not illegal in New York to do that, by the way. You can pay off somebody as hush money, or there's a technical term like a cell phone that's not a burner phone. Somebody can pay somebody and they sign a what?
A non-disclosure.
Non-disclosure.
Now, my understanding with some of the non-disclosures, you cannot non-disclosure your way out of a crime. If you committed, say, assault, and you have them sign a non-disclosure and give them money. Now, I don't know if this is true for New York. I shouldn't say it's 100% true across the United States, but you can't have them sign a non-disclosure to receive money, and then they're not allowed to talk to, say, a prosecutor if it was a true crime. So, for instance, if there was a crime committed and Stormy Daniels signed a non-disclosure, she would be allowed to talk to any prosecutors. You can't stop a person, like the legal process, right?
Right, and I do believe she did, and the feds looked at it, and the feds found that there was no crime here.
She signed a letter saying that it didn't happen, and the attorney for the disgraced attorney, that attorney also signed a notice saying that his client, which is the attorney in question, paid money of his own volition and it had nothing to do with Trump or Trump's funds, and Trump never gave him any money.
So if it did happen, let's play devil's advocate.
Okay, so now we're saying that it did actually happen.
Yes. So would the better course of action had been for him to just come out and say, yep, maybe I did have an extramarital affair. Case closed.
I think he could have, or he didn't have to, either way. But just assuming, as you said, that it did happen, that Trump had an affair and Trump paid Stormy Daniels and anyone else, because they're also saying it happened another time, at least one other time, if not many other times. Let's say all of them are true. Let's say there's 100 women, all had affairs with Trump, all signed non-disclosure agreements, all got money. As long as the money wasn't illegal, I don't think it matters. And it shouldn't matter. And if you ask him, did you have a relationship with that woman? He can say no, he can lie. Also not a crime. He doesn't have to tell you every truth, so to speak, in his life. He doesn't have to say, one time I accidentally pooped my pants. If somebody asks you that, hey, have you ever pooped your pants before? And he says no. And then they say, we have proof you've done it. Does it matter if he lied about it or if it's something embarrassing or something he didn't want to get out there? By the way, there is pretty significant rumor that Biden pooped his pants in Rome. Now, if he did, should he be required to admit to it if ever asked that question by a reporter?
No. So the reason I was looking at the First Amendment, because I'm seeing pastors that cannot speak their mind per the First Amendment.
Because if it ties into political dealings, they can end up losing their nonprofit status as a church. You're not supposed to be politically influential. So there is a big line in the sand that they have said, if you cross this, you will lose your nonprofit status because you're acting as a political arm.
And you are correct, and that works both ways. Do you know what the First Amendment fully says?
I wouldn't be able to do a recitation off the top of my head.
Well, let me quote it for you off the top of my head, which my head is attached to my iPad. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And you are correct when you say that there's a broad line that pastors of a church should not cross. But when you have religious individuals peacefully protesting outside of buildings and they get arrested, they get threatened to be sued, threatened to be imprisoned, That goes 100% contrary to the First
Shall
Amendment.
not be infringed.
Yes. And what are the three limits to free speech? Time, place, and manner. They apply to all speech, regardless of their view expressed. They are generally restrictions that are intended to balance other rights or a legitimate government interest.
Right, you can't yell fire in the middle of a crowded theater. That is not a part of your freedom of speech. Something that can cause harm to other individuals.
Correct. And this is where it plays into the government's role here recently within the last couple of years and all these riots across the country to incite lawless actions was adjudicated by Brandenburg v. Ohio, 395 U.S. 444. So therefore, let's see, it would be which three organizations have been burning buildings down and not focusing on the true intent of the First Amendment?
Well, I would say that Antifa, the figment of our imagination, if you listen to the federal government at this time, Antifa, and then you have the Black Lives Matter, BLM, capital B, capital L, capital M, not that Black Lives Don't Matter, lowercase BLM, but the organization BLM has been at the forefront of helping to incite violence at places. Now, are there very peaceful people? Absolutely. But there are also people who are not peaceful. And we have seen buildings burn. We have seen people attacked, people killed. And just recently, there was an organization that went into the federal legislature, the Tennessee legislature as well, to demand action, as they would call it, on gun control. And it was done during a session. The session, for instance, in Tennessee, the Tennessee Congress was in session. And they were stopped from carrying out their normal duties because people essentially broke into the Capitol building and attempted to stop a proceeding. That would be, by definition of everyone on the left, an insurrection. And you can have an insurrection of a state capital as well as a national capital. So all things being equal, we just had another, if it's equal, insurrection. Although the difference here is I haven't seen any police officers that were escorting people throughout the building, and they weren't as similarly situated, let's say it that way.
Yes, and that third organization we're looking at
would be
Occupy Wall Street.
Ooh, the Occupy Wall Street. Now, if you remember part of Occupy Wall Street and taking over physical spaces, they had a lot of criminals who hooked up with the movement, and it was supposed to be about, oh, well, you know what? It's hard to remember because all of the criminals that were there made it about crime. So it's hard to follow your movement when crime is attached to it. But New York, the New York mayor did come out and say that all of the Trump supporters, so he said this on Monday, all of the Trump supporters who will be coming for his, coming down to the courthouse for the official indictment, that New York is a very safe city. New York City is a very safe city, the safest, biggest city there is in America. And the lawlessness of Trump supporters will not be accepted in such a lawful city.
Yeah, it was amazing that he made the statement that you Trump supporters better be on your best behavior while a lot of their buildings and stuff were burned during the Occupy Wall Street, Antifa, and Black Lives Matter. Yes.
They can be on their worst behavior, but if you are not politically aligned with them, you must be on your best behavior.
Well, and the interesting thing was I went to NYPD's website today just to kind of look at the stats when he made that statement about their crime. And their murders have actually gone down a little bit historically to 2010. However, they are marching back up. And just since January of this year, they're already up 35%. So it's an alarming number that a lot of folks that live in New York are very concerned about. They're still concerned about being pushed off of a train track or a subway and into the line of a subway. They're worried about getting robbed. They're worried about getting beaten up. Yet our major concern in New York is to make sure that a man's prosecuted for potentially paying off a date night, so to speak, which all it merely is his accountant put the numbers on the wrong side of the ledger, so they think that's justification to go after them and try to prevent the people, when I say the people, the American people, from making the decision as to who they would like to have for their next president.
Yeah, another thing with the DA who worked to indict Trump, apparently he is backed by George Soros. And I'm not sure if you saw that going around.
Nah.
There's an organization that backed this district attorney, came out publicly and said they support this district attorney. After that, George Soros donated $1 million to that group. Then fast forward, that group comes out and says, we are pledging $1 million towards the election of this district attorney. So the money didn't go from George Soros directly to this district attorney. There was an intermediary, but it's in the same amount. And that's what he pledged. Well, fact checkers have come out and said that that organization did not give $1 million to the district attorney's campaign. Therefore, it's a lie.
So would they give $990,000?
Apparently, they only ended up giving $450,000. But it wasn't a lie because the organization did, in fact, pledge $1 million. They just didn't turn it all over. They kept some for themselves.
Yeah, say probably one of the executives within that organization decided he wanted a bonus.
But it's quite interesting that you can see that the organization says, yes, we back this person. George Soros then gives $1 million to that organization. Then that organization says, yep, $1 million is what we pledge. Happens to pledge the exact number of the George Soros money.
I do believe that Zuckerberg did that during the 2020 election, where he put together a bunch of little organizations that donated and did a lot of legwork and helped change the hearts and minds of people in the wrong direction. So they voted for the guy hiding in the basement.
And it really bothers me, and this is across the board, Republican and Democrat, independent, just across the board, that we say we have election limits on our money, but then if a person takes the money and gives it to a third-party organization, that third-party organization can turn around and use the money on behalf of a candidate. Now, what generally happens is that candidate doesn't technically have a say in how that money is used or how their image is used or how their likeness is used. So they could attribute things to that candidate that maybe that candidate doesn't want highlighted. But it's still an attempt to favor the candidate. And that is money coming from billionaires and in some cases multimillionaires to sway an election. And that really does not sit right with me.
No, it drives you nuts because you know it's happening. You know it's altering the way the election's going to turn out, and you can't do anything about it.
No, you can't. And even something like a Google search result, Google is deeply political. We can see this because in their return, as soon as you type in your search, the first things that start to return tend to be things that are slanted one way. And they return search results that are politically slanted. Even if they claim they're just a search engine, they are not. And they have been looked into by a nonpartisan group. And this nonpartisan group did a study claiming that, in fact, Google News itself is heavily promoting left-leaning media outlets. And this is from All Sides Study.
So very interesting that you bring this up, because I did all this research on the First Amendment today, and I tried every different phraseology I could use to see how it would populate and come up, see how it would query. And one thing I did read was that the First Amendment protects individuals from government censorship. Social media platforms are private companies, and can censor what people post or say on their websites as they see fit, which means that you have someone that aligns with a political party, and then since they're so large and they have hundreds of millions of followers, they're allowed to change the narrative and swing things in one direction or the other.
And in fact, if you want to look at Google, I believe something like 90% of all people who search for something use Google to do their searches. And there's other options out there, but that should tell you something if 90% of people who are searching on Google.
You are correct. And I did a Google search on other countries that had a First Amendment like we do. And there were several that they claim to have a First Amendment, but it's really not. What it's called is freedom of expression. It does not align with our First Amendment. And country leaderships often use what they claim as a protection of their state's secrets to squish the freedom of expression so as they will not be criticized.
So talking about what private companies can do, New York Times has a bestsellers list. It is very widely known to those in the book community and even those who are not in publishing, writing, etc. But a lot of people, if you were to say the New York Times bestsellers list, they would understand what you're talking about. Apparently, James Patterson has now called out the New York Times for manipulating their bestsellers list. And he did an analysis of one of his books compared to the top 10 on the New York Times bestseller. And what he said was, what's up with the New York Times bestsellers list? Anyone besides me noticed that Mike Pompeo's book sold more copies than 6 titles on that list today? Or I said top 10. I think it's just their list, their top list. So Patterson called out the fact that Mike Pompeo's book had sold more than 6 of the titles, but he wasn't above those individuals. And in fact, James Patterson had a book called Walk the Blue Line, which was a collection of real-life stories from police officers across the country, and it was placed below other lower-selling titles. Now, he is a New York Times bestsellers list recipient many times over, but I guess this is one that really caught his eye, was the fact that his book was rated lower, and they came up with this kind of convoluted statement of how they come up with their bestsellers list. It turns out it's not necessarily being a bestseller. It's who they want to say is a bestseller.
Exactly the way I believe radio pushes new songs. If you play it 1,500 times a day, if it's a little catchy, people will start listening to it. And songs that are actually probably as good or better,
they don't play them as often?
They don't play them as often because the person that's pushing the song maybe doesn't like that writer or that singer. So it takes the same line as a New York Times bestseller.
Pretty interesting. So if they're manipulating something that has data behind it that people can see and compare, what do you think that they're doing with information that we cannot necessarily see the data behind it? They can make statements and then just be the news organization and say it.
Well, and that's exactly the way ABC, NBC, and CBS used to be back in the 60s when they were the big 3 and they were the only 3. And that's what brought along a lot of these new popular sites like Fox News, I think it's CSN, and there's a handful of others that they're trying to be impartial and show both sides of a story instead of creating the story, keeping the information to themselves, and the narrative is only based on what they're telling you and not what potentially the real truth is. That's one of the things that concerns me about this, the Ukraine-Russia war, is just prior to this war, we were calling Ukraine a bunch of money-grubbing thieves. And then now all of a sudden they become our best friends and we're going to populate their pensions with cash flow. The International Monetary Fund just approved a loan for, I believe it's around $12 billion. They just released $2.5 $5 billion of that to them today. We have said we're going to give them more. 2 of the NATO countries are going to send them bombs.
Well, I find it interesting that we spend so much money shoring up all of their accounts and their borders and their airspace that we are letting our accounts, our borders, and our airspace go. The Chinese balloon that went by just came out that they were able to real-time collect on our military installations. So Biden's administration allowed the balloon to go its course, its full course from the West Coast to the East Coast and collect data the entire time.
See, I have to correct you. You are wrong.
Oh, I'm wrong.
Yeah, especially when the wind's blowing 20 knots east and the balloon's going 20 knots east, and then it just stops and starts doing figure eights around one of our nuclear weapon sites. No, they weren't collecting information. That was free flow of a big wind bag just flying across our country. And that's tongue in cheek. I'm just kidding. Absolutely, they stole as much as they possibly could. They probably could have self-destructed it because it had a self-destruct mechanism. Maybe it malfunctioned. We should have shot it down as soon as it reached Alaska and not let it go all the way across our country. There was some sources and methods here that they were able to glean that we should not have let them glean. And I do believe part of that could be because of the Hunter Biden laptop, because of how dirty the Biden family is, potentially. And maybe, just maybe, it's another conspiracy theory.
Just another conspiracy theory that Rob Walker, who paid the Biden family over $1 million, visited the White House 16 times during the Biden's vice presidency. Just a coincidence. Nothing to do with any real data.
You are correct. They're only coincidences, though, until they're proven to be true. Just like our theories, just like everybody else's theory. There's a rat here. We smell a rat, and hopefully we'll eventually flush it out and we'll know the truth.
Well, if all things are the same, we should just get some local Republican district attorney who's willing to indict Biden and his family. I mean, that's how it works, right?
Absolutely.
It's all a political hit job. No, they need to be gone after because they've done bad things. Not just bad things, but illegal things.
Well, I think we can carry that even one step further. Let's go to what you and I have talked about multiple times, which is term limits on congressmen, term limits on senators, and rewrite the Constitution so the president cannot do 2 terms of 4 years. He can do 1 term of 6. He's done. He goes away. When they're elected, any ties or affiliations they have with stocks, bonds, any type of retirement community has to be set aside into a trust. They cannot touch it. If there's any hint of impropriety, any hint of insider information or trading, don't prosecute them. Don't waste our time with that. That money they made from that point, you take it back. You take it from them. You distribute it to the American people.
Yeah, but you got to have due process.
Yes, you do.
So unfortunately, you still have to go after them.
Well, see, and that's a good point, because political hit jobs like they're doing to the former president and all these others right now is really not due process. It's a political hit.
It is. Well, if you look at Nancy Pelosi, after it was released that Trump was going to be indicted, she put a statement on there, on her, I believe it was Twitter, that said that Trump had the right to go to court and prove his innocence, which is not how our system's supposed to work. It's innocent until proven guilty, but even our former top House of Representatives is out there saying, and she's still an elected representative, that Trump has the right to go to court and prove his innocence.
Well, you know what that means, don't you? Is that they feel that a good majority of Americans are stupid. They don't understand how any of this works, just like that old commercial with unfriending you from my wall. And her friends say, no, you don't understand how any of this works. They believe a majority of the population does not know how politics works. They don't know how our judicial system works. They think they can say and do anything they want, and people will listen to them 100%.
I mean this with as much respect as I can to the people of Chicago. And this is not a reflection on the individuals of Chicago. I understand that there's a lot of bad politics and bad policy that ends up happening. But right now in the Chicago public school system, they have a 0% pass rate on reading and math. So that is not to say that the individuals, our children, are stupid, but what I am saying is that we are making them so ill-educated that they would have no idea if you don't teach them that it is innocent until proven guilty, but now you're making it guilty until you prove yourself innocent. They might start believing that. They might start believing that that is how our system is, and they don't have an understanding of their rights here in the United States. And that's across the board, not just in Chicago. We have a failing public school system, and so we aren't educating our kids. We're not getting them to reading proficiency. So how are they going to read the Constitution and know their rights?
Well, they don't have to. Why do they have to read? They don't even have to work now. In some states, in some counties, we're going to start giving them a free check. You just show up and get your $1,000 and go on with life. So why would they have to learn anything? They don't need to understand the Constitution. They don't need to understand atrophy and what happens when you just sit around on your keister. You don't produce anything. You don't go anywhere. You don't do anything. You just wither away and go back to dust.
So I would like to bring up a few topics that we have discussed previously on the show, just to give an update. So we talked about the Weather Underground article that said that California was due for the $1 trillion disaster. And so I was doing some research to see how close we were since we had so much damage occurring. As of March 17th, so mind you, we've had more destruction since then. The storms have caused an estimated damage of $638.7 million, and that's to the state's highways since the downpour started in December, and all of the repairs that are underway just across the board, up and down the state. So as of March 17th, with not all storms accounted for, we are at 638 billion and climbing. We may reach that $1 trillion storm year that was talked about in 2019 through Weather Underground. And in fact, Mammoth has had its snowiest recorded season. We are seeing the official, as of April 1st, the official number is at 668 inches of snowfall, all-time record since we've been keeping track. So we are at an all-time high with both with our water and with our damage.
Since we've been tracking.
Which is not long enough to have a true historical, inception type of thing. But it's pretty interesting information there.
Absolutely. And I searched around the world. I went around. I went to the UK. I went to Australia today. I took a trip to South Africa. I was looking at American news overseas. And it was interesting that there was a UK article about Tulare County, which is just right down the road from us. And I believe you mentioned the lake.
Yes.
So the article said it's an American lake that has reappeared after 100 years. Well, the interesting thing was it was drained, physically drained 100 years ago to create ag land.
I just read about that. So it is great that you bring it up because I was talking about reappearing. So then I thought wrongfully that it was every so often we have these torrential rains and something comes of it. But that was not the case. Apparently, our damming of the waterways up the mountains so we could have water, controlling our water throughout the year, and we can give drinking water and land use water, farming water throughout the year. All of that damming dried up the lake, or helped to dry up the lake. So we would still have a Tulare Lake if it wasn't for us damming the water.
And that's what made the article interesting was there was a writer that basically said people in Tulare County are worried about climate change because the lake has reappeared. And I was thinking, wait a minute. If through time and temperature changes the lake naturally evaporated, I would say yes. Then we might have a potential issue here. But when you intentionally drain a body of water and you put levees up, canals, ditches, and you turn it into ag land, well, that has zero to do with climate change.
Absolutely. That was human change. And so we have short memories, myself included. I did have to go researching and hearing more about the Tulare Lake and why it dried up, which was us. And in doing so, it opened my eyes to the false climate narrative that we see in some locations. I'm not saying other locations haven't had any other significant changes, but as far as Tulare and the lake is concerned, that was a man-made drying up of the lake. It's for a good purpose in that we dammed the water so we could have water throughout the year. We have so many people in California and more people coming that we need to have water stored and resourced for a year and years to come for those drier years.
So, interestingly enough, an article right next to the article about the reappearance of a 100-year-old lake. In the UK, dairy cows in the near future could be fed methane suppressants in a bid to cut down on greenhouse gases. UK is trying to get to net zero by 2050. It's interesting that they say the world's 1.5 billion cows each emit about 500 liters of methane a day and are significant contributors to climate change. The gas is 80 times more warming than carbon dioxide is to the atmosphere. Interesting thing I was thinking is this is a recent study, and I hope they're studying the effects of what it does to the milk as well. If these are dairy cows, how it's going to affect human consumption. See, this is like GMOs, or genetically modified fruits and vegetables, and people are adamantly against this. So if you start introducing a chemical to a cow, even if it's a natural one like garlic, there's some natural ones that will work. It's garlic and a couple other.
Seaweed was studied in 2021.
Yes, seaweed is another one, but you're still, and what I called it was a GMC, and not the truck either. It's a genetically modified cow.
It will be interesting to see what ultimately comes of it, and if it does in fact work to the scale that they say. One study out of the University of New Hampshire said that there was a 20% methane reduction by using seaweed. But not only would it have to be studied if the methane was reduced, but as you just noted, what does it do to the milk? How is it going to change human consumption? Because sometimes these factories or these companies change their product just a little, and it actually makes it an allergen for some people. So you go and say you're eating a product and it's been fine for a decade, and then they change how they source something, they change an underlying chemical component, and now a person who's eaten it for a decade is allergic.
You would be correct. So much so, let's take a military base over in Uzbekistan Air Base in the early 2000s, from 2001 to 2005. We have found that there is 15,000 military people that stayed there that are now sick. They were getting sick on a regular basis while they were in their tents on the ground at this air base. They did multiple studies, according to the DOD, on whether there was carcinogens in the ground, whether there was diesel fuel, jet fuel, fertilizer. Well, unfortunately, a veterans advocates group is suing them to find out what they were susceptible to, but they will not release it. And is this another case where they're going to let the numbers play out, or is this a case where they just simply don't know? But here's another military base, another case where our troops not only go into harm's way, but they're put in harm's way just by the base they're staying at, by the water they're drinking, by the food they're eating. Now, the sleeping bag they're sleeping in and the ground they're laying on.
Another case. Just another thing. Well, speaking of the government knowing or not knowing something, I understand they may not know everything and have to research it, but do you remember the formula crisis that we had not too long ago?
The shortage?
The formula shortage?
I do.
See, what had happened was...
What it was
there was a deadly bacteria in the baby formula. And so they pulled the formula off the shelf, which created a supply chain issue because when they had to shut down the factories for cleaning and then seeing what ultimately contaminated the baby formula and the fact that the FDA wasn't getting in there quickly enough to view whether or not the factory was clean and give them the go-ahead to start producing baby formula again. But it turns out that the FDA has now admitted that they had knowledge of the bacterial contamination in the baby formula months before they issued the recall, or months before the recall was issued. So in November, the FDA inspected a plant where Enfamil Pro Sobi Simply plant-based infant formula was being made. And they were informed that a deadly bacteria was detected in the Michigan facility in September. So here you have in November, they're told, oh, by the way, the bacteria was found in September. So that was months prior. So despite the initial contaminated batch being destroyed, another 145,000 cans were recalled because the bacteria was found in the formula. And no bacteria was found in the formula that was later recalled. So in February, the recall came out, which was 5 months after the discovery of the initial finding of a deadly bacteria in the formula. So it went from September to November to February. And then we had this baby formula shortage.
And was anybody held accountable that knew about it ahead of time?
So far, no.
It's because, in my humble opinion, they're either extremely arrogant or they just don't care.
So it does turn out, though, that the company was not required to tell the FDA. By law, under the current law, the company was not required to tell the FDA that they found this deadly bacteria in their formula, and only admitted to it after they were investigated by the FDA.
Interesting, isn't it?
So if they're not required by law to admit to it to the FDA,
they're not going to say anything.
Yeah, so it was
that law needs to be changed.
It does need to be changed because we end up in the 2021 baby formula shortage crisis because of it.
Yes,
it just doesn't make sense.
You could get your notebook and just number 1 to 1,000. Start with number 1, baby formula debacle, shipping debacle, our supply chain debacle, studying super viruses and trying to merge things together for 12 years, and we knew it, but we hid it debacle. Navy water in Hawaii, undrinkable, poisonous. Camp Lejeune, toxic. Uzbekistan Air Base, toxic. Camp Pendleton, toxic. Multiple Navy ships and Marine Corps ships out at sea, toxic water. Fuel in the water, water in the fuel.
Our government definitely has our best interest at hand, and in fact, we should give them all of the rights and powers. We should forego our amendment, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, constitutional amendments, and just give all the power to the government because they have our best interest at heart.
Almighty, all-knowing. Couple of quick Navy stories. Unfortunately, a Navy SEAL, Silver Star recipient Mike Day, passed away this week. He was one of the individuals, if you read his book or you watched his story a few years ago, he had suffered 27 gunshots while he was deployed to Iraq in 2007 on a mission. Quite incredible. I urge you to look up Mike Day, look up his story, find his book, read it. I don't have enough time to sit here and read the whole operation that he was on, that he was shot during, but it's quite an interesting story. But rest in peace there, Mike. And also, when something's secret, do you tell about it if it's a secret?
Well, technically you shouldn't. That makes it a not secret.
Absolutely. Well, the Navy Times has announced that their secret project Overmatch is going very well. They're using the ship Carl Vincent to perform the tests. So just find it interesting. Something that's supposed to be secret is not so secret.
That's weird. Although when things shouldn't be secret, they are incredibly secret.
Yes, we overclassify
Yes.
way too much stuff.
And underclassify some other things, or our government officials are just allowed to release information and there's no recourse.
Yes, it's kind of interesting how prices are still up too on everything. Gas is climbing again.
Over $4 a gallon, and it has been hovering over $4 a gallon here in the Central Valley, which is usually a much cheaper location when compared to, say, Los Angeles or San Francisco.
So do you think that the McDonald's corporation is pretty large?
I hear it's about to be not as large.
Yeah, and it's a pretty good indicator that there's stuff going on in our economy. Yes, McDonald's has temporarily shut down all their U.S. corporate offices and some internationally, and they've told their staff to work from home this week, and they will do a Zoom call and announce the layoffs, but they will not specify the numbers.
Probably still crunching who needs to stay and who needs to go.
And their corporate executives are calling it a broader company restructuring. So let's talk just a little bit more about military, okay, before we move on, because I found a very interesting study today that was presented by my favorite doctor, Dr. Campbell. And there has been some research done on vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. And it was a military study and projecting to help with suicides. And they have found through a peer-reviewed research, they haven't done a full-blown lab study, but this is what this organization found. When military veterans consumed D3 over D2, it decreased the incidence of potential suicide by up to 40%, which is a very interesting stat. And it was more pronounced in people of color that were active duty military simply because the darkness of their pigmentation in their skin, when they're out in the sun, they're not able to absorb as much natural vitamin D from the sun. Therefore, when they supplement, it actually helped them even a little bit more, which I thought was pretty cool. Really good study, and veterans things are always important to us. So I just found if you'd like to, go on to Dr. John Campbell's YouTube channel and watch his latest episode, which is about a 20-minute clip on this vitamin D3 and D2 study.
It is really interesting as far as what they're doing for military members and what they're studying. And that will help more than just military members. That will help the general public as well. Something that I've been asked to do as a veteran going to the VA is to participate in some of the studies that the VA is doing. And I'm highly targeted because of the underrepresentation of females in the studies. And I say no every time. I know they already have a lot of information on me. Technically, they have my medical records. I seek VA treatment, so they're going to have my history on many different things. I've done blood work for your general health exams, and I've seen them for years, or they've seen me for years. So technically, they do have a lot of this information. I just choose not to release it to the groups doing the study. And I'm wondering if I'm in part doing a disservice to the next veteran that it might help.
Potentially. And you'll have to make that decision for yourself at some point in the future. It's interesting that an organization wanted to study me at one time a few years ago, but after chatting with me for about 10 minutes, they realized that I was unstudyable.
Unstudyable or unsteady? And I'm just kidding.
Yes. So crime is still pretty high in California.
Crime is up in California. Now, it may not be up to historic levels per se, But we won't know the actual levels that crime is up to if we don't report it. And many cities and jurisdictions are not reporting their crimes, or they are not arresting for these unlawful offenses, so their crime statistics are skewed.
Well, a sheriff in Riverside County who is not afraid to put out stats from California and his communities is the fact that violent crime in California is up 5.6%. Nationwide, there were 64 officers killed in 2022. In 2022, there were also around 340 officers shot. And he has made the statement that it's because they're more emboldened. And why are they emboldened? Because we have these DAs that are Soros-backed that refuse to prosecute.
Mayors that are supporting these DAs.
Yes. And you have criminals that are no longer scared because they know they're going to be arrested, released multiple times, and nothing's going to happen to them.
Or in some cases, just ticketed. I will say they're lucky or unlucky for us, but if they're just ticketed, they are not even arrested for crimes that they should be arrested for, or they're giving zero money bail, so they're let out right away, as you noted. But apparently London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, is actually in a way admitting that there is rampant violent crime and a problem with open air drug dens in her city because she has requested federal assistance to help tackle said crime.
Yeah, so our coined phrase is,
they create the problem.
and they say they're the solution.
Right. This local area government who is doing the very left thing that they've been touting that they want to do, which is to decriminalize certain actions, not arrest for certain crimes, and essentially call them non-crimes. And then it hasn't worked the way they claimed that it was going to work. So why should you get more tax dollars when you created your own problem? Now everybody else should have to pitch in from across the country to fix your problems because that's what federal dollars are.
I don't believe that she should get more federal funding. I believe that if she is the sole proprietor of this problem, or if she created it, she should be held to account. She should be penalized in some way, whether it's through censure or they cut part of her pay to help take care of this.
Well, and she's also complaining that there's police staffing shortages.
Duh.
Didn't they want to defund the police? They wanted to do all of these other nice little programs that didn't involve police officers. I believe they were supposed to have social workers and things like that and people like that. So if you didn't want police in the first place and thought that they were acting wrong or wrongfully, why are you now complaining you don't have police officers? They actually helped you. Natural attrition, they went away. They helped you achieve what you requested.
They helped you achieve your goal. And is this the same part of the state up there that's asking for federal dollars that wants reparations?
Yes, somehow they're going to pay $5 million plus a person. That's what they say that they want to pay, but they don't have enough money to take care of their problems, and they're asking for federal help.
So they really don't know what they're doing, do they?
They don't. They don't, because it would cost $800 billion for reparations in San Francisco. For California, that's 4 years of our state budget.
So do you think maybe that, bear with me, that this whole thing with these liberal people is that they're trying a compassionate side or a compassionate trigger, and they're thinking that if they don't put people in jail, if they let drug addicts roam the streets, if they give them all the methadone, all of the whatever drug they take to ease their pain, that it relieves society of some type of burden and it actually helps them, when in fact it's hurting them, it's hurting the leadership, and it's hurting the very people that vote them in or hire them to make sure we're safe and we can go from point A to point B on a regular basis.
Yep.
That was a good answer.
Yep. It's In part, it's just a cyclical kind of statement. We can say what we can say, and they can think it's compassionate. We are not compassionate people because we say that we don't think that you should just allow a person to continue to do drugs openly on the streets where school children have to walk by them, walk through them. I, as a former federal employee, when I was getting to work, I had to step around people who were sleeping or passed out on the sidewalks in Hawaii. And it is not compassionate to me to continue to let criminals out because somebody is going to get attacked. Somebody is going to get robbed. Somebody's going to get burglarized. Somebody's going to lose their property. Somebody's going to get physically harmed. We even saw it on Capitol Hill where we had a staffer who was attacked by a person who was released from prison the day before. In these cities and in these areas, we say it's compassionate just to let it go and let it continue happening. So if you want to say that it is not a level of compassion to take a drug addict and put them in jail, I can agree with that. But if your only answer is to let them keep doing drugs on the street, I'm going to disagree with you. Let's set up the compassionate thing, which is to help address their underlying problem. It could be that they suffered something so traumatic they couldn't get over and they turned to drugs or alcohol and their life spiraled. Hey, let's address it. It could be that they just have a mental health condition that they are feeding with drugs and alcohol. Okay, let's address it. But just to allow them to continue to do those things that are harming them and then ultimately harming society, that lacks true compassion.
Absolutely. That's where that big cyclical thing comes in. You talked about it because being a 60-year-old, I've seen it for a long, long time. And you at your young age, you will see this same thing. You'll be podcasting with someone else or one of your kids 30 years from now.
With Esri and Jadzia, right now they have Help the World podcast. So if you would like to find them on YouTube where they wish to help the world, hopefully they will be the answer to stop the cycle, but continue.
And you are correct. And that's what needs to happen is some younger minds need to dive into this thing. And I don't mean younger minds that want to continue to allow them to do drugs in the street. Younger minds that want to actually fix the problem. Because we have a mess here that needs to be handled, or we're going down a road, slippery slope that we'll never make it back from.
And just to touch, it's not just the, if you will, light crimes, the petty crimes, or the drug-related crimes. There was a district attorney in Alameda County that attempted to get support for not jailing a gangbanger who murdered a toddler. A 1-year-old, Jasper Wu, died in the crossfire of a gang shootout on Interstate 880 in 2021. And of the 4 suspects, 3 were charged with murder, and the 4th died in a shootout that was outside of this particular shootout, died in a later shootout. But it was found that the district attorney was looking to punish in a way that wouldn't send the gangbangers to jail.
And I don't think there's anybody smart enough on this planet to dive into that person's head and figure out why that would even cross your mind.
That a person who murders a child, and I wouldn't say doesn't need to go to jail or doesn't deserve to go to jail, but somehow doesn't need to go to jail. And this is appears to be another George Soros funded progressive DA. And somehow it's progressive to allow murderers back into society with no punishment. I'm not talking about somebody who was rehabilitated from their wrongful and bad ways against society. That was the start, was no jail is what she was seeking.
I wonder if anybody has ever interviewed the Soros family, or they've gone and spoken with a psychologist to see what the heck is in their mind, that because they're billionaires, they think they have to tinker with our judicial system and make a mockery of it and make a mockery of U.S. citizens, because I am not sure if he's even a U.S. citizen. If he is, shame on him. If he isn't, shame on him. Because I think it's time that somebody, explains to him that we need to show you where the rubber meets the road, my friend.
He naturalized in 1961.
Okay, so he is a U.S. citizen then.
He was born in Hungary in 1930, immigrated in 1956, and naturalized in 1961.
Okay, well, that would make me then wonder why he is funding and doing the things that he's doing. Makes no sense.
It really doesn't. You can call it philanthropy all you want, but philanthropy, trying to make sure that DAs are progressive and don't want murderers to go to jail. Because it's not a rehabilitative thing to just say, it was a gangbanger who made a bad decision, killed the baby, let him out.
So if he wants to do work like that, then he needs to build a facility in all 50 states that they can send people to that are on the street, that have drug problems, that have psychological problems, and hire doctors and nurses and help them. Not have DAs keep them out of jail so they just live in the street like wild people. Actually get them some real help.
And then causing a health crisis because now there's human matter all over the streets. They tried putting bathrooms out there, but they charge for those, so people don't want to use them. They don't want to pay for those bathrooms when they can just take over the street, and it's not a criminal act to go to the bathroom in front of somebody.
And it's unfortunate that great technology has been invented here, like Microsoft and the Apple apps and all that, and somebody being a developer has to develop an app that shows visitors that are going to the Bay Area here in California where all the needles are and where all the human fecal matter is, meaning he or she who built the app tracks where the homeless roam around the city there and where they do their dirty business.
So part of that is people input it when they pass it by. They tell somebody, hey, this is here. So that way other people will know, this is a really bad area to go to right now. Don't go there.
Right. It's like MapQuest and your moving map. And when you see a car broken down on the side of the road, you can pin it so everybody that is behind you can see it.
Absolutely. So to touch base on a couple of other topics that we've previously discussed, to give you an update, there was a 6-year-old who shot his teacher, first grader, shot his teacher in Virginia. She has now filed a lawsuit seeking $40 million in damages from school officials, accusing them of gross negligence, and also because they ignored multiple warnings that day of the boy. They were warned he was armed. They were warned he was in a violent mood. I guess at one point they searched his backpack, but the teacher said other kids since that search saw the gun and reported that he had a gun, and they requested permission to search his person as well as his backpack again, and they were denied the opportunity to search his person. The parents were supposed to be there. That was a part of the plan for him being at school, because apparently he had strangled a kindergarten teacher. He was banned from the school after that, but they allowed him back in for first grade on the condition that one of his parents would be present with him. And I guess they decided that he was having such a good couple of days or a good little while that they didn't need to go with him anymore. And they were called back to the school when he started having violent tendencies that day. And they took their time getting there.
Does that not make you wonder how little 6-year-old, can have issues like that? How there's a breakdown in the home, or he was born with a chemical imbalance?
I'm going to go with he was born that way. Obviously,
Yes.
I don't know him. This is just my guess based on some of the stuff that has come out about him. But for me, at what point of helping a troubled child do you have to call it quits with that particular opportunity in the school system? Because that is putting other children and adults at risk.
Absolutely. And for the greater good of the other children and the parents and the administrators, i.e. the principal that's at that particular school, to me, it's one major incident like that. The kid is expelled and gone. Period.
Absolutely.
because it's more important for you. If you have 100 kids there or 1,000 kids in that school, it's more important to protect them, because all it takes is, as you see, one mistake. And she's lucky that she's alive.
Yes, she is. She's had multiple surgeries and she's still recovering. It's unclear if she will ever fully regain her complete function.
And she probably won't. It's very unfortunate. And there was just a dust up recently with a CNN reporter and Congressman from Texas, Dan Crenshaw, talking about this very thing with what happened in Tennessee with the shooting. Is it would be appropriate now to put at least 2 officers in every school. And you can come up with the officers, however, that's for an expert to figure out and decide. But her jest was, why don't we just eliminate guns? And his statement back to her was, well, wait a minute. I have protection, Congress. You have protection here at CNN. You cannot just walk in the front door. There's armed security at the front door. Why do we not afford that protection for our youth, for our kids?
And something we don't talk about is the use of guns as a defensive. So like the defensive use of guns, somebody comes after you and you're able to use your gun to stop them from harming you or harming your family, either breaking into your house, if you have a concealed carry, being attacked in a public space. One of the things that the FBI did was take down their statistics on using a gun for self-protective purposes. And I understand that any loss of life, we have 6 individuals who died. They were targeted at that school. And whether it was a Christian school or not, a school is a school. Children are children. But do we say that people aren't allowed to defend themselves and we make it easier for somebody to take an unlawful action?
Well, 2 things. Number 1, unfortunately, in this day and age, as you just said 5 minutes ago, we're not rehabilitating people and making them right. Therefore, we have to protect our citizenry, and not by taking away one of our amendments or one of our rights. We have to put the amount of protection in place to provide safety.
And something that has come out with this individual who targeted the Christian school, she targeted the school because she found that there was a lack of security. There were 2 other sites that were investigated by her to also go and attack. And she decided against it because they were too secure.
Well, I was looking at that before her social media pages were taken down, and she did send a warning to her friends. Hey, look at me, look at me. And I do not know if either of her friends that saw it after the fact or before the fact. And hopefully, if they did see it before the fact, they did notify law enforcement that, hey, she's about to lose her.
One of them did, and in fact was contacting law enforcement and attempting to get her looked at, but unfortunately she was already at the school. At least one of them did. The
incredible thing about that, and like you just said, it's very unfortunate when there's a loss of life. Very unfortunate. Children, adults, senior citizens, whatever, a dog, for criminy sake. But it's not the weapons problem. It's not the gun. Pure statistical data that has not been taken down proves that. There's 330-some million people in America. There's over 450 million guns. And the incidents are very isolated. And what do we find with almost every one of them?
Mental health issues.
Mental health issues, lack of rehabilitation, somebody that just loses it for whatever reason.
And this particular individual was being seen for mental health conditions.
Yes.
I know last week the father said she had no known issues, but it has come out that she was in fact receiving mental health care. And apparently her parents had told her to get rid of a gun that they knew about because they didn't think that she should have one because of her mental health issues. And the claim is that they thought she got rid of it and they had no idea that she bought more.
That's unfortunate and amazing. You know, what else amazes me is the fact that the officers were such professionals here and how quick they were to go in and take care of the situation. You compare that to another mass shooting, unfortunately, where the officers
Waited
and stood idle while multiple children were killed. This is officers that put the child's life before their own. And I hope they're commended, and I hope that good things happen to them in the future.
Yes, for this bad situation. Out of this bad situation.
Yes, and I'm not saying that the officers in the other scenario were bad officers or bad people. It's just situations like this when the true mettle of people comes out and you see heroism versus self-protectionism.
Let's go ahead and segue out into something that's not as heavy. Going on to California, and they have been given the okay to seek removing diesel engines from California. So there will be a diesel engine ban that's supposed to kick in by 2040 or in the 2040s. And California wishes to implement this. They want to get rid of the big rigs that are on the freeways, on the roads, and other vehicles like buses and garbage trucks. They want to stop diesel, basically. But our waste companies are pushing to get an exemption. And this is because they went with natural gas. They essentially went under the belief that natural gas was the way of the future. So they switched over their vehicles to natural gas. And it was once, as they called it, California's golden child. It was a clean and better way to operate vehicles. And many vehicle fleets all over the state moved to natural gas.
I remember this.
And then the science said it was not as clean as they thought or as clean as they wanted it to be. But now the expectation is everybody to transition over to electric. So we spent how much money transitioning to the better energy of the future, and then this diesel ban, along with a potential natural energy ban, natural gas ban, is going to drive us to electric only.
Well, see, these experts here don't know what they don't know because they're the ones that should have to pay for this out of their own pocket, in my opinion. However, we have diesels over in Europe that actually have been proven to produce zero emissions, but the U.S. didn't like them, so they wouldn't import them. And this is going to make you laugh because this is Americana. People love their lifted trucks, especially me, because I've had lifted trucks, I've had lowered trucks, I've had everything in between, and I have a factory lifted Dodge Cummins now, which I love, and it replaced a little bit lower Dodge Cummins truck. Well, in Australia, I told you I was all over the world today. Aussies are extremely mad because the trendy American pickups are making their way to Australia. And the reason it's upsetting people is because they're so big, they're taking up too many parking spaces, and their roads are too narrow to support these big Dodge Dualies and these F-150s and these 2500 Chevys, and they don't want the trucks there. So what some of the Aussies have said is this is wealthy people that are going through the change of, I guess you call it change of life, or what do they call it for a man?
Midlife crisis.
Midlife crisis. White guys in their 60s that are going through a midlife crisis that just want one of these trucks. Very interesting. Yeah, we're trying to ban them here. And so let's look at this. Think of this. Vision this. And I just rambled for like 2 seconds there. Envision this utopia they're looking for. A perfect world with no internal combustion engines. All electric. But what is the cause and effect? Don't they care about the environment? Don't they care what the land looks like? What's going to happen when we start stripping and strip mining all this territory around the world to bring all these natural elements out to create these batteries and this new technology by the hundreds of thousands? It's going to look terrible. So we can have, quote, zero emissions. We're going to destroy the earth to get there.
And somehow that is green. Is it green because they're going to poor countries and taking their natural resources?
And not paying them fairly or equitably for what they are strip mining out of there. Just like my beautiful phone I have sitting right next to me. You know, we pay $1,000 plus for these phones, and they're built over in what they have called developing countries for 100 years for probably $10. And the person that's helping build it probably gets $1 a week.
That's our government for you. Our government officials, our governor being one of them, is pushing to essentially strip mine foreign countries because we're not getting that product from here.
No, there's very limited resources, and we have one small mine, I believe, in Colorado or Utah.
I think they also just started looking into one somewhere between California and Arizona, but it's not operational. So we won't have it operational, and we're already pushing to have these vehicles by 2035 is for the average person's new car. And then by the 2040s, they want diesel trucks off the road.
Well, they should turn all these vehicles into rentals, because I know when you leased a Fiat, the replacement battery was more than the car. So, and they still have not developed the technology to strip the batteries back down, rebuild them, or reutilize them. So just like the big blades that are 90 to 120 foot long with the windmills, they have no way to dispose of those either, or how to recycle them. So we need to put the cart back behind the horse, rethink this technology, and take our time.
Not only in the area of green energy, because that's been the big topic of conversation, but another thing that is happening in the infrastructure bill that was signed by Biden in 2021, it was called the Investment and Jobs Act. Apparently there was a rule in there. It will be mandatory for new cars to have working alcohol detection features starting in 2026. While there are certain things like interlocks that are tested that have been put on people's cars once they have been arrested for and convicted of a DUI, or sometimes they agree to it in lieu of a formal conviction. But what they want is a vehicle that senses alcohol, whether the person's breathing, just openly in the car breathing with alcohol in their system. This technology does not exist to the level that would be necessary to have it put in cars by 2026.
Okay, so two things. What if you have another case of COVID running around the world and you have hand sanitizer in your car and you clean your hands, so then you're going to have alcohol scent?
Or you brushed your teeth and you rinsed with mouthwash, and that can last for up to 30 minutes.
But more importantly, along with this drive to go pure electric, they're also talking about making them autonomous vehicles, which drive themselves. So why would you have to have a breathalyzer if the car drives for you?
Or what if your passenger, Uber, what if your passenger or all your passengers, what if you have 5 passengers in your vehicle, you have a big enough vehicle, it has 5 passengers, and you have a bunch of people who just had a wonderful night getting intoxicated and they're getting a safe ride home.
Walk home.
What happens then? There's going to be tons of booze just oozing.
Yes, well, see, they don't think these things through.
But in case you did not know, that was put in your 2021 infrastructure bill.
Well, they always do that. They always put pork in bills too, and I don't mean pork bellies and pork and beans.
This was supposed to save us from all the COVID damage. How is this related to COVID damage?
Yeah, I do believe I heard a little quick news clip and saw something or heard something the last couple of days that someone that had stolen some COVID funds just got convicted and is going to jail.
And we will never get that money back.
Never. Once it's gone, it's gone.
I believe they said up to 25% at least that they found of the COVID funds was wrongfully obtained and stolen.
And we were just in a rush to give free money away without thinking this thing through.
So the government makes a mistake, which is to not have a secure way of releasing these funds and making sure that they go to the right people. And then who suffers? The taxpayers.
The taxpayers. You know why? Because these people think it's an endless money stream. Just raise the taxes.
And the government doesn't have to take responsibility for the things that they've wrongfully done.
Like we've said, nobody gets held to account.
In Atlanta, Georgia, there was just a case in that city where the city decided it wanted to tear down a dilapidated property and that it didn't meet the city's requirements for a habitable property. So what did they do? They gave notice on the house that they were going to tear it down, and you give notice so the city you can appeal to the city. No, it's not dilapidated. I'm working on it, whatever the case may be. Well, apparently they were sending this notice to the wrong address. Different zip code. The only thing that was the same was Lawton, which was the name of the street, but they sent it to Lawton Avenue in a different zip code. So they sent notice wrongfully. This individual who owned the home actually was following the law, which is that you have to register when your property is not inhabited. And they had put it on the city register. They had given the correct address when they registered it in the city. It was brought as an investment property and they were fixing it up. But in the meantime, they paid to have it on the vacant property registry. So the city had the right address. In the middle of this remodel, show up one day so their contractors can walk them through the next steps. And they came and saw that the entire house was torn down. And if that wasn't a bad enough story, do you know what the city turned around and did after they were informed of their mistake?
Probably sent him a bill.
For $700,000. Sent him a bill for $700,000 for their mistake.
And I'd turn around and sue him for $1 million.
So he actually filed to get money from the city, his claim for damages, but the city said they cannot accept any responsibility in this matter. Therefore, they will not pay the damages.
I'd still sue him.
One of the international stories that we brought you was the sushi terrorism. So there were people filming themselves going around to sushi conveyor belt places and touching the sushi, placing it back on the conveyor belt, touching the different bottles that were out there for people to use, licking them, putting things in their mouth and putting it back down on for other patrons to be contaminated with. Well, a Japanese man who did lick a soy sauce bottle has been indicted in what is considered a landmark case of sushi terrorism.
Send him to jail.
So hopefully they can get people to be normal humans. I'm actually surprised this
responsible and
came,
respectful.
Yes, I'm surprised this came out of Japan because generally as a population, they are a very respectful they are culturally respectful people. But you had some young people, a 19-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 21-year-old who have been apprehended, and now one has been charged for sushi terrorism.
Well, you think maybe they're watching Instagram and TikTok videos?
I would say so, because there was just another one where a young lady ended up in the hospital for the bucket challenge that people were doing, which is to go to a public place such as a Target or a Walmart and film putting a bucket over somebody's head when they're not paying attention and running off. And it turned out that this individual suffered from a medical condition and it caused her to fall. And so she had to go to the hospital. So we're seeing all of these things that are funny pranks on Instagram and YouTube, etc. Not blaming Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, but they're seeing them. They're widely shared. TikTok, same thing. And then they're trying these trends to get followers. It's sad.
So do they not have people that watch those videos to pull them? It's interesting that they will pull a video if someone talks about a potential link between, say, COVID and a lab. But if somebody puts out a video that could potentially do bodily harm to somebody,
it still stays out
they
there.
let it continue. So do you think that our politicians, some of them are corrupt?
100%.
Yes. You know what kind of blew my mind was during my international trip today, I was reading news from News 24 in South Africa, the most trusted news site there.
According to themselves?
Yes. And it appears that their politicians, reading some of the articles, have the same corruption issues there that we do here.
Funny that you bring that up. In September of 2017, my husband and I had the privilege to go to South Africa. We had the ability to go to Cape Town and visit a wonderful part of South Africa. Then we flew to Durban and drove a few hours to a nice wildlife adventure place. We went on safari. It was absolutely wonderful. But while we were in Cape Town, we were taking Ubers to go places. So actually our first Uber experience was in South Africa. When we would get in the car, it was natural to have pleasantries. Well, we ended up talking to one guy, and you can generally tell where people are from by their accent. And of course, okay, where are you from? And we said California, talked about the United States. And he said how much he wished we could switch presidents so they would have a less corrupt president in South Africa. And mind you, at that time, Trump was in his first year in office. So this particular individual wished that they had Trump so they would have a less corrupt individual in office.
Awesome.
This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor Duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.